All right, friends, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and we're going to burst some more bubbles today. But before we do that, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com so you can get all of our latest content. Look, The Conscious Resistance is a website I've been running since 2013. It's exploring anarchism, self-ownership, self-governance. It's exploring spirituality. It's exploring self-help, self-empowerment, community farming, permaculture, anarchism, agorism, as well as dissecting geopolitical news and U.S. news, as well as looking at true crimes and conspiracies and all kinds of other weird things that tickle my particular fancy. If you like that, if any of that sounds interesting, you're going to want to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, and wherever you're listening or seeing this from, subscribe, follow, like, share, etc. But if you're watching from Facebook or you're watching from YouTube, I'm going to tell you again, follow us on Minds, follow us on Steam and DTube, join our Discord channel, join our text list, and if you want to get the videos, get them from BitChute or Minds or Steam or DTube, because I won't be on these platforms for too much longer. Also, if you want to support, sign up on Patreon or Subscribestar. And yeah. So, like I said, bursting bubbles today, because I know there's still some of you out there who believe that Donald Trump is this clean guy who is coming in as president and saving the day. You know, he's totally transformed things. Nothing's the same as it was under the Obama administration or under the Bush administration. Obama really just changed things up and got us to, Trump got us to a new place where the Obamas of the world and the Bushes and the deep state criminals, they don't exist. They have no power, right? Except for as soon as he got into office, he stacked his cabinet with Goldman Sachs, with former Bilderbergers, with people from the oil oligarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's expanded drone bombing. He hasn't ended the wars. He bombed Syria based on lies, a false flag attack. I mean, I could go on and on. But what I want to focus on right now, for those who are still listening, because I know some of you heard that and you're like, oh, this is just an anti-Trump liberal. Look, get over yourself. If you know my work and if you've been to this channel, you know I'm not just some left-wing liberal anti-Trump, orange man bad. But I'm also not just some right-wing Trump is good and everything he does, calling out the media, I celebrate it no matter how bad he actually is. No, I can look at it objectively and say, look, all presidents are puppets, and Trump might have a different veneer, but he's no different. And that goes for the right, who thinks he's the savior, and the left, who thinks he's the worst guy ever. The reality is he's just more of the same. Here's some proof, because remember, the proof is in the pudding. And this one coming from Activist Post, Habeas Corpus. Trump administration uses Patriot Act Provision 412 to indefinitely detain someone. December 1st, 2019. The Trump administration has enacted Section 412 of the Patriot Act. You guys remember the Patriot Act, that horrible thing that was created after 9/11 that violates Americans' rights, that so many people fought against during the Bush administration and fought against during the Obama administration and shut up about during the Trump administration? The provision of this act, Section 412, allows for the indefinite detention of resident aliens under national security grounds. And of course, this should not be confused with the indefinite detention of American citizens under the NDAA, which is passed in 2012 by the Obama administration. Adham Amin Hassoun has spent nearly the entire war on terror behind 4 cement walls. Hassoun was first charged on immigration violations in June 2002, but Hassoun was never accused of any act or plot of violence. Let me repeat this again for those of you who hear a foreign name and automatically assume he must be a terrorist. Hassan has never been accused of any act or plot of violence. His crime was signing checks to extremist-tied Muslim charities operating in places like Kosovo and Chechnya that Congress outlawed following the 9/11 attacks. Hassan wrote all but one of those checks before 9/11. So he writes checks before 9/11 that go to charities that have been tied to extremists in Chechnya and Kosovo. Hassan was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and should have been a free man in 2017. Instead, he finds himself in the custody of ICE now. ICE, that agency that we keep empowering because we're trying to stop the illegals, and it's slowly turning into the Stasi. Oh yeah, let's not worry about them, because get rid of the illegals. They locked him up in Western New York and set him for deportation. Kevin McLennan, the then acting secretary at Homeland Security, recently informed Hassoun that he will, quote, remain in the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement pending your removal from the U.S. or reconsideration of this decision. ICE wants to deport Hassoun. However, the fact that he lacks a state as a Palestinian has gotten in the way. No single country, not the Lebanon of his birth, nor Israel that occupies the West Bank and Gaza, was willing to take him. No single U.S. president in 18 years since the Patriot Act has ever used 412 to detain any non-citizens. Let's read that again. No U.S. president in the 18 years since the Patriot Act passed, that means not Bush, not Obama, has ever used 412 to detain any non-citizens imprisoned on American soil who are deemed a, quote, reasonable threat to U.S. national security. Patriot Act Section 412 gives the U.S. government extensive power to detain non-citizens on U.S. soil who cannot be deported but on, quote, reasonable grounds are considered to be involved in, quote, activity that endangers the national security of the U.S. Now, come on, guys. Reasonable grounds, national security, these should be trigger words that let you know that it's just more BS. Although President George Bush sent detainees to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, overreaching habeas corpus jurisdiction of the U.S., the Patriot Act has never been used until now to do the same within the borders of America. So they're saying, look, Bush did send people to Guantanamo to detain them, but now this person is being detained within the U.S. borders. Officials argue Hassan poses a continuing threat to, quote, recruit, plan, participate in, and provide material support for terrorist activities. So they're alleging that he's going to supply weapons or information to terrorists, but there's no evidence. And again, let's go back up to this part here. He has never been accused of any act or plot of violence. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. The man's lawyers, two professors from the University of Buffalo Law School, argue that the U.S. is going to unprecedented efforts to keep their client in prison indefinitely without charge, and by doing so are violating the man's rights, calling the case an example of a violation of habeas corpus and unconstitutional, as if that matters. The lawyers say the fact that Hassan remains in federal custody after serving his time, in addition to the unprecedented usage of Section 412, proves the degrading rule of law following the attacks on 9/11. This is Guantanamo on domestic soil. The government is trying to detain him as long as it wants, and that prison happens to be in Batavia, New York, not at Guantanamo Bay. The ACLU said the government's repeated and now unprecedented efforts to keep our client in prison indefinitely and without charges are unconstitutional. Pretty crazy. And I expect to see very little coverage of this, even in the independent alternative media. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of stuff going on. But when we're at the point where people are being detained, this is a red line that for many of us said, hey, if they ever start rounding people up, I'm getting the hell out of here. And guess what? They are rounding people up. They've been rounding people up. They've been finding all kinds of excuses to round people up for years since 9/11, and they're still doing it. And it doesn't get much coverage by the alternative media. It definitely doesn't get any coverage in the mainstream. And in fact, many of you watching this probably have no sympathy. That's just been my experience. Is people are like, yeah, well, he shouldn't have donated to those charities. Yeah, so he should be held for 17 years or for 15 years because he donated to some charities, and now he should be held indefinitely. But you know what? This isn't anything new, guys. I don't know if you guys remember this because, again, it was ignored by most of the media, independent and mainstream. But back in November, back in the summer and early fall of 2017, the Trump administration was also holding another American citizen without a charge or trial. And it may have been under the NDAA. We don't really know because it was such a secretive situation. Civil liberties advocates are worried about the fate of an American citizen. And now again, in this case, he was accused of fighting for ISIS in Syria, but there was no evidence. And in fact, he basically was left there. People said he was abandoned in Syria, and then they rounded him up when they were arresting ISIS fighters. He's been held for almost 2 months, as of 2017, in a secret prison in Iraq without access to a lawyer. The ACLU is fighting to represent this American man, that means born in America, who has been accused of fighting alongside the Islamic State in Syria. The U.S. military has been detaining the American citizen at a secret prison in Iraq without access to a lawyer or even releasing his name to the public. He has been labeled an enemy combatant by the Trump administration despite a lack of evidence to bring charges against the man. So they don't even have evidence to bring charges, but they just call him an enemy combatant. Sounds kind of like George Bush. The ACLU reported at the time, we went to court asking a judge to protect the citizen's constitutional rights, including the right not to be imprisoned without charge and the right to challenge his detention in court. The Trump admin has told the court that it doesn't have to respect these essential due process rights. The Washington Post at the time revealed that the man was captured in Syria on September 12th. He reportedly surrendered to a rebel group in Syria before being given to the U.S. military. According to the Post, as told by anonymous officials familiar with the case, the Justice Department does not believe they have enough evidence to bring charges against him. However, if the military does not charge him, they will face legal challenges. The ACLU was leading the way, And so this case went on and on. Anonymous officials told the Post that the man has been questioned by a, quote, interagency interrogation team, and that he refused to answer questions and requested a lawyer. He again refused to cooperate and repeated his demand for a lawyer. An additional complication emerged. Web postings suggested he may have done some reporting in Syria as opposed to being a fighter. But U.S. officials are skeptical of the idea that he's a journalist. And by the way, we still never found out this man's name. So that was, 2017? And as I wrote in here, it's possible the Trump administration is indeed taking a dangerous step towards the complete erosion of civil liberties. It has not been stated by the DOJ or the U.S. military, but it is possible that this man was being held under Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act. Many of you may remember that the NDA 2012 contained the controversial sections 1021 and 1022, which allowed indefinite detention of American citizens without right to a trial if they are suspected of terrorism. And Obama signed this bill in late 2011, saying, I want to clarify that my administration will not authorize the indefinite detention without trial of American citizens. However, maybe Donald Trump will and did use this. So that was November 2017. And then as of November 2018, the American citizen detained by Trump admin without charge for more than a year finally set free. So that was a case that came and went that most people didn't even pay attention to, and I followed it as best I could and kept up with the legal ramifications of it. But they've shown now they can detain Americans and hold you. They held this guy for more than a year. And yeah, some people say, well, he was in Syria. He shouldn't have been over there. But that's how they play this game. They find somebody who's a little questionable that people won't really have much sympathy for, and then it sets a precedent. The precedent has been set that they can take an American citizen and hold you indefinitely and without charge, without trial for at least a year. And now they're setting another precedent where this man, who was arrested in the days after 9/11, being accused of donating to charities who've been accused of terrorism, was held for 15 years and now is continuing to be held on American soil by ICE in New York City, or in New York State, under the Trump administration. This is all going on, guys. This is happening right now. So tell me how much different Donald Trump is than George Bush or Barack Obama. I'll keep waiting. And until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.